So thanks for coming to my talk. My name is Sunny Ware. I'm a security architect and web application pen tester. I'm going to talk to you today about exploit kits, the biggest threat you know nothing about. So let's start with something that we're all familiar with. Let's say you're shopping for a new camera and you Google and you come with this result set page back and you decide, now I like one of these cameras. I'm going to go ahead and click one of these links, even though the retailer may not necessarily be, a name that you're familiar with. So you click the link only to be greeted by this message. What? All my files are encrypted. Not only are they encrypted, but I've got to come up with 1.2 Bitcoin, which is about $500, and I've only got 4 days to pay this. What am I going to do? So hopefully by the end of this talk, instead of being greeted by this, you will be greeted by something like this. Basically, I'm going to give you tips and tricks that you can employ, whether it's at your organization or on a personal level, that will help protect you from having ransomware and other types of malware being dropped on your system. But basically, in this particular protection, you would have been warned that, hey, look out, on that page you're about to go to is this reference to this Google Ad Services.com, which has malicious traffic coming from it, and it was found on Peter Lowe's ad server list. Okay, so let's talk about what is the real threat here. What is it that we need protection from? Well, we're talking about drive-by malware, right? Or we could be talking about malicious advertising, also known as malvertising, spam campaigns, which we know are the delivery of malware through email, and of course ransomware, which is probably the worst perpetrator of all. Now, all of these things have in common the way that they can be delivered, and that is through something called an exploit kit. Now, if you're not familiar with what an exploit kit is, basically it's a piece of crimeware that allows for the packaging up of various types of exploits, as well as the mechanism to deliver those exploits. And guess what the target is? Your browser. Now, let's go through the infection process. Basically, we start off by going to a legitimate website. Now, on that website is a malicious ad. Now, there's nothing that's going to indicate to you that this is a malicious ad. There's nothing to inform you that, hey, something's going on behind the scenes. What's happening behind the scenes is you're being redirected through several different redirections to eventually land on an exploit kit's landing page, at which time there's going to be a bunch of probing for vulnerabilities inside of your browser, inside of your operating system, to basically infiltrate your system in order to land the malware. And we'll talk about the different payloads in just a moment. Now, one of the key differentiators about exploit kits is it doesn't require interaction on the part of the user. This is a bit different from other types of attacks that we've seen in the past. But basically, this entire process of redirecting and probing and determining vulnerabilities is happening behind the scenes through opaque iframes, malicious iframes that have been injected in compromised sites. I'll get to that in just a moment. Let's go through the workflow one more time, but I'm going to point out the vulnerabilities that are being exploited. So first of all, the malvertising, as we said, it can be on a legitimate website. The problem comes in is that you've got to send or redirect your victim through a series of gates. Those gates are created on infected websites. Now, these infected websites, they're basically compromised, meaning they have web application security vulnerabilities that are being exploited. Cross-site scripting, clickjacking, this type of thing. The redirects the redirects are being done through compromised domains. Legitimate domains that have subdomains that have been created for purposes of launching pads to direct victims through. Then of course, there's the exploit kits themselves, which we'll get into some of the actual names of them and their differentiating characteristics. But these exploit kits are going to be targeting some common vulnerabilities that are known in the industry, and then for purposes of delivering the malware. Now, the payload of the malware is generally done in two stages. You'll have a dropper, which is sort of your staging, the staging malware that is needed in order then to deliver the payload. So in order to understand exploit kits properly, we really need to go through a series of terms: gate, landing page, exploit page, and the payloads. So let's talk about the gate. The gate is a reference generally through malicious iframes that are planted on compromised websites. It's a redirection or series of redirections to send you to an exploit kit's landing page. Now, one thing about these redirects, if you take a look at this, you'll notice that from the malvertisement, we come to this malicious iframe that's then pointing to a URL that's known to have malicious traffic. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind is that these URLs do not stay static. So if you try to create, network rules or looking for this particular URL, it's going to change within a month's time or less. Now, once you finally get to that landing page, this is where the probing of your browser and the version number comes into play. The plugins that you're using inside of your browser and their versions. How about the operating system type, right? It's looking at your operating system and the version if it's up to date. Could even be looking at what particular website you came from. It really all depends on how that particular exploit kit was written. Then you come to the exploit page itself, and this is where you've got the dropper, followed by the malware, and then, of course, you are already hooked. Now, when it comes to potential payloads, of course, we could have, I've mentioned the dropper, but we could have the ransomware, which is what we're hearing a lot about these days. We could have a Trojan, which this is a really interesting one. So even after you pay the ransom, if you don't have your system cleaned or get rid of it, you could still have the Trojan living there, right? So they could just come back and do the same thing again to you. Spyware and adware. So in order for these exploit kit platforms to work properly, which, by the way, is a really big business, is very sophisticated, this is not script kiddie stuff that we're talking about. There has to be some assembly parts to put this together. So they include the hosting IP addresses and domains. These, of course, are compromised. You need to identify which particular exploits you're going to go after in order to get a foothold on your victim. You're going to have to identify how you're going to have your malware delivered. And then, of course, what payload are you going after? Now, one thing you have to get your head around is that exploit kits is componentized. It's a componentized model, which means you can break up parts of the exploit kits to be done by different service providers. What kind of service providers? How about malvertising as a service? This is literally service providers that do nothing but bring traffic to your exploit kit. That's what they do. Then, of course, there's malware as a service, which I think a lot of us are probably already aware of, but they can customize your payloads and so on. Now, this is big business, as I mentioned. Let's look at some of the numbers. So if you've got, now realize these numbers are associated with Angular, which is no longer around, but it gives us a good idea of what kind of money we're talking about here. Let's say they have 147 redirection servers. Out of that, they're targeting 90,000 browsers per redirection server. and they're serving about 10% exploits. Now, of that 10%, let's say that less than 2% actually have the ransoms paid. Just on a conservative level, let's say it's about $300 that's getting paid per ransom. That comes to 34 million. That's on the conservative side. That's, about 3 million a month. So not bad money. And this is just one exploit kit. We know that there are many out there. Now, as time has gone on, companies have tried to stop the proliferation of exploit kits. And so the exploit kits have become more sophisticated. So they do things like the domain shadowing. That's what I mentioned earlier, where they're compromising legitimate domains, creating subdomains under them in order to be used as launching pads to send their victims through. The 302 cushioning is, of course, 302 is a redirect. If you've got network analyzers, generally you're not going to see anything suspicious, or you're not going to think there's anything suspicious in a 302. So it's a way for these exploit kits to sort of get lost in the noise. Custom encrypted payloads. So this is the abuse of the Diffie-Hellman protocol, basically where you're having encrypted traffic between the malware that's deployed on your victim's machine and the command and control of the exploit kit itself. So if that traffic is encrypted, it's going to be harder for the network sniffers to be able to read that. All right, my question to each of you, have you interacted with an exploit kit? Well, in order to answer the question, let's take a look at these questions. Have you seen a malicious ad? You probably have, but you may not even realize it, right? Especially if you go to some of these other sites that are lesser known. How about visiting an infected WordPress site? Maybe you posted a blog there, right? You could easily have malicious iframes injected. And we all know, how hard it is to keep WordPress safe. How about having the Java plugin inside of your browser? Probably have that. Do you have Adobe Reader on your system? How about Flash Player plugin, right? Do you still have Apple QuickTime, right? Anybody have Apple QuickTime still residing on their machines? No. So basically, the bad guys have gotten to a point where they've got to make this very easy, a very simple way to figure out how to get the money to them, right? Because grandma could get infected. Grandma could get this message that says all of her files are now protected by a strong encryption of AES. She's not going to know what that means, but all she knows is she can't get to her files anymore. So now you'll see step-by-step instructions letting grandma know you need to go to this website, you need to put your credit card in, it's going to return Bitcoin, which is going to unencrypt your files. Now, of course, the results that we're hoping for is grandma pays the ransom, she gets her files back, everything's good and everything's happy. New tactics now are, let's say you don't want to pay the ransom. Another alternative is you could actually work for the exploit kit platform by allowing your machine to be another launching pad. Might appeal to you, I don't know. The threat landscape. So let's take a look at what these exploit kits are and their characteristics. This particular picture is of Black Hole, which was one of the very first exploit kits. Now, the way that it works is you actually sort of rent an account, right, of an exploit kit. It's centrally managed. This is not software that gets given to you. So you get an account, you log into your account, and basically you're going to see a series of statistics. So you've got the browsers that are getting exploited. You'll have all of the operating systems that are getting targeted, and the exploit kits themselves. So of today, Angular, Rig is the #1 guy, Nuclear and Neutrino. Recently we've had a series of incarcerations, and we've seen lesser activity of a lot of these, as well as the death, of course, of Angular. So a lot of changes on the horizon. The main characteristics here with Angular, Flash, and Java vulnerabilities are targeted. And it always seemed to have this particular function in its deobfuscated code. RIGS tends to prefer PHP as its programming language of choice. And you can see here in a malicious ad, it's got a redirection that takes you to a gate. And at that gate, of course, this compromised website has a malicious iframe. In the landing page, it's some malicious VB script. RIG likes to focus on Windows services and likes to hide itself looking like legitimate services. And same thing with Nuclear, some of the same exploits. Neutrino likes to target websites running over port 80. So you can see a lot of commonalities between the exploit kits. As of this just a few days ago, we're seeing now some other exploit kits come to rise that used to be considered second tier. So look for Sundown, Magnitude, and Sweet Orange, which used to not be talked about a lot, but because of the death of the others, they're becoming more relevant. So let's take a look at our defenses. Obviously, we need to make sure that secure coding is part of our organization, that we've got secure SDLC to address the vulnerabilities that these exploit kits are taking advantage of. Also, security conferences. Now, from a processes perspective, we've got to incorporate static and dynamic analysis of our web applications. And of course, manual penetration testing. Network gear, we've got our usual layers. And we also have some very interesting products coming out, like Bromium, which has a mini VM to contain malware, as well as Cylance. I don't know if you all are familiar, but they were very instrumental in rounding up the SamSam ransom that targeted hospitals. And then Endgame has a very interesting hardware approach to solving the problem. Information sharing is coming along. These organizations are available. You can look them up to get more information, but basically there's also a supporting infrastructure for each of these that can feed information about the tactics, techniques, and procedures being done by the threat actors. Let's talk about you. How can you protect yourself? So one of the products that I think is very interesting is this Sandboxy product. This is actually Sandboxy containing CryptoLocker. Very interesting product, very affordable. If configured properly, it could help you in a situation like this. Of course, browser security, make sure that everything's up to date. Go with a company that spends a lot of money on browser security. Application blocking, I mean, we know at this point not to use Flash or Silverlight. If you have to, make it click to run. Glassware, really, really cool product. You can basically monitor all the network activity on your desktop with this product. There's a free version, and then the paid version is very reasonable. So proxy ad stripping, you can do that with some plugins. DNS sinkholing, really want to emphasize if you don't use OpenDNS or a different DNS, please look into these. OpenDNS has a free product. You can change the configurations on your home router. Good stuff here. I highly recommend them. Block Origin. uBlock Origin is the product that you saw in the beginning, where you have, pointing out what's malicious and where it was found. Now, you can choose to override this if you like, but basically it's there to protect you from going further. And of course, host-based blocking is probably the very best. You've got your safe script and your no script, but the problem is, it's going to break every single website you go to. So if you have the patience for it, it's certainly a great protection. And then there's the Sandboxy product that I mentioned. So in summary, They're very sophisticated these days, and as a result, we need to build in our protection some complexity as well. These are my references, and if you like what you see, please subscribe to my YouTube channel or connect with me on Twitter. Thank you for your time.